You know, one of the great challenges of being in a profession like ours, or being in an architecture school, is knowing, is what I'm doing worthwhile? It's a very critical, our profession, you know, and being an architect is a long thing. I've been doing it for ages and I feel like I've just started, you know. So the great thing about the prize, the Biennale, is that it offers you the opportunity to put something in different context. This is no longer the teachers at your university, your professor. This is a whole bunch of independent judges who are going to say something about your work. You don't know what will come back. It could be something quite surprising. I think I came to hear about the Student Biennale when I was an architecture student at the University of Sydney, because it was quite a special thing. You know, it was the first time it had happened. I was a very keen student, keen to get involved in various things. And so I put in one of my studio schemes. You always do these things with great enthusiasm and energy, you know, and you're best off not really thinking too much about what the outcome might be. Of course, it's a great honour and it's a terrific boost to win a prize, but you know, as time goes by, what you realise is the benefit is broader. What is most important, in fact, is what you get out of it through the engagement of your work, rather than when you're successful in winning a prize or not. The greatest thing that prizes like the Biennale do is they contribute to our collective architectural culture, to the investigation of ideas and the pushing of boundaries. All of these things incrementally start to change your thinking, you know, start to bring you into a level of higher expectation and higher objective, and put you in an architectural community that can achieve a great deal. It's not a prize that is based on an architectural design competition around the same brief, around the same site. It's a prize and a competition that embraces a kind of diversity. And that's what makes it very, very special, and that's where it can really and has really contributed to the culture of architecture, and that's why I think it's held in such high regard, not only by the students and the academic community, but also by the profession.
Okay, welcome everyone, our studio audience here in Melbourne, and also a special welcome to all of you joining us online for this web seminar to commemorate the launch of the Colorbond Steel Student Biennale online gallery. I'm Stephen Liu, and it's my great pleasure as Chair of the National Education Committee of the Australian Institute of Architects to welcome you to this sort of special event and to be host and facilitator for our two interviews today. Now, as we all know, the Student Biennale competition is, I suppose, Australia's longest running competition for students of architecture, and it was started by the Institute of Architects way back in 1985, and so it celebrated its 25th anniversary in 2010, and it's in its 27th year sort of currently. Now, the Biennale, as we know it affectionately, the Biennale actually recognizes, I suppose, the works of students and the design merit within those works, and it bridges and builds a connection to the profession where the recognition of design quality sort of occurs. I have today two guests, two very special guests, a past winner, Ruth Wilson, and the most recent winner of the Student Biennale competition, Adrian Keenan, winner of 2012. So we'll do two short interviews, and maybe we'll start with Ruth first. Okay. So Ruth Wilson, as I mentioned before, won the Award of Merit in 1990 when she was still a student at RMIT, with a very unusual and quite far-reaching project for a tram terminus in Swanston Street with performance spaces. And it's still, I think, even now, thinking about it, it's still as radical as it was way back then. Ruth is currently Director of award-winning architectural practice, Architectus, based here in Melbourne. So welcome, Ruth.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll start. Tell me, what were the impacts of winning the Student Biennale when you were a student in 1990, and what were the longer-term impacts of that, of that winning right now for your career?
Yeah, well, the immediate impact was just, completely honoured and overwhelmed. Friends, family, colleagues. I'd already started working at the time, and certainly the office, which was called Miller Smith at that time, was absolutely over the moon that I'd received this award. And the directors at the time and the associate directors of that practice are now actually my business partners at Architectus. So it's been a long and enduring relationship, and I think perhaps that award maybe confirmed in their mind the opinion that they might have already formed about me, and about the friendship and the business partnership that we've developed. And longer term, in the middle of my career, or not really the middle, I left Australia in 1992, I think along with a lot of other architects, searching for better projects to work on, or even projects to work on. And I went to Germany, which was very busy due to the reunification, and certainly having the Biennale Prize in my folio was a huge draw card, and I was able to get work very easily. And longer term, it is something that I dwell on, and for me the revelation was, as a student at RMIT, it was all about the process of design. So my design thesis was all about how I went about arriving at this rather bizarre design. And I remember sending it off to the Biennale and thinking, well, they're never going to get it. How can they understand it if I'm not there to explain it? And to receive an award that was basically awarded on the output, not the process, made me realise that if you have a robust process, your chances of achieving a good result are much higher, and that's certainly something that I've taken with me in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting to reminisce back to the 1990s and what was actually happening within the student scene, and also the international architectural scene and the national scene. I'm just wondering if you can comment a little bit about where the Student Biennale competition sat in the ethos of, let's say, at RMIT.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to try and recall is life before Google, and that scarcity of references that we had, visual references. We had magazines that we would hungrily devour. We had the library, and as an RMIT student, we would often go to the Melbourne Uni Library. And then we had each other's work, and the lucky few that might take a trip to Europe would come back with suitcases full of books, and we would pore over the books and photocopy each other's books. And so the Biennale, the publication, which was so high quality and was openly available, that became one of our key reference sources, because you could look at what all these other students were doing, analyse their design, and I think student work was and probably is so inextricably linked with the presentation technique. So we would pore over these drawings and work out how they'd done them, and try and copy and practice. So I think as a reference source, and then of course there was the travelling exhibition, which was really important. We would spend hours there, once again dissecting everything.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the travelling exhibition and the catalogue, and having the opportunity to take a look at a whole range of works, not just from your own institution, but basically what students in other institutions are doing, because it's an open competition without a brief, and you submit your own work that you have actually accomplished in your own universities in competition with the others. And I think, especially in a period, and I'm reminiscing here because Ruth and I were in the same year in the same sort of Biennale. I mean, Ruth won over the rabble of us that, were the other award winners. But I distinctly remember, poring over those catalogues when they came out, and also the exhibition when it came to the schools, because the exhibitions actually toured right around Australia.
Yeah, it was very, very important.
Yeah, and so I suppose this, I mentioned in my introduction that the Student Biennale competition does bring academia and the profession together. It's one of those few occasions when there's a kind of crossover. It's sponsored by the Institute representing the profession. it has works that came from academia, and I'm just wondering where you see this connection playing out, and what do you think the benefits are of a competition like this?
I think at the time it felt like being springboarded into the profession. You had this huge kind of leg up into the real world, so to speak. So you'd come from the environment that you'd known so well for 5 or 6 years, and you know, I'm sure every student finds their own kind of home within their institution, but then to be kind of springboarded into the real world and have this under your belt while you're doing it, it was, you know, just a great benefit.
Yeah. And I remember the status of actually having won an award like this and suddenly feeling as though you were, you know, as you say, leapt over the fence from academia into the profession. So that's, I think, you know, still the benefit of that. I'm just going to come to Adrian now and to see whether the benefit of that is still there. But before I do that, I'd like to kind of introduce our kind of second award winner. And as I mentioned before, Adrian won the most recent Student Biennale competition in 2012. Adrian's from the University of South Australia, a recent graduate, and is now working at Hassel, kind of based in Adelaide. And his project in 2012 was the Barangaroo crematorium, which is, again, interestingly, a very unusual typology. And maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, of the types of projects that get nominated as award-winning in the competition. But so, what does it feel like, you know, winning the award?
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's definitely, for me, it's been amazing to be recognised outside of the university community that you become so familiar with. You know everyone else's work, you know sort of where your place might be within that, but to be to put that into the national mix and be seen to be doing something that's understood and valued in that setting is really reassuring to understand that your practice is relevant in a national setting. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was the status of the Biennale, you know, within UniSA? Was it something that the students were aspiring to? Was it there, you know, kind of talked about with staff?
Yeah, definitely. It was introduced to us by the staff. They're the ones who sort of prompted a bunch of us to enter, and it was definitely something on the radar that, especially in final year, where there's that. I guess you have the ability to get stuck into a project in much more depth than you do in the earlier years, and there's this thing in the back of your mind that if you do a good job, if you, are pushing some boundaries with what you're doing, then there's this kind of chance you might be able to sort of slip it into the project, into the prize, and be in the mix. So I guess that comes back to what you were saying before about what types of projects might be put forward in the Biennale setting, and it definitely is those ones that are slightly left of centre. A crematorium on a headland in Sydney is probably not the obvious choice of the brief was a cultural centre, so it's not the obvious choice. But I think that pushes you to design in a different way and to push some different angles on things when you have a topology that's perhaps not what would be considered normal or standard.
So have you taken a look at past winners and past sort of catalogues and exhibitions to I suppose understand what sorts of projects get selected and perhaps is the Biennale a barometer of what students are thinking about and what issues concern them?
I think it can be, and looking through, I guess what's fresh in my mind is the shortlisted ones in the 2012 Biennale, and they were all doing something quite different. There's obviously the crematorium, the performing arts stadium that was put forward as well it was a completely different topology to a building that you've seen in Sydney before. There was some really delicate community housing that was done in a way that it's just it's a different take on something that everyone understands. I think that's probably, I guess, what I'm trying to get at. So it's a different interpretation of things that people know and coming out of it.
And do you think, going back to Ruth's point earlier on about process-oriented projects, do you see those coming through? I mean, is process still a key agenda within, let's say, the final year graduating projects in architecture?
I think it can be. For me, it was more about concept and idea and experience and really pushing that through the design. But there still definitely are a lot of process-based projects that come out of the universities. So I think it's a mix of both, I think.
And so what are your plans for the... Well, actually tell us, what did you get as the award winner this year?
A bunch of cash, which was amazing. That was actually really exciting, not just for the cash, but for what that means. And for me, I've actually just booked a trip to Europe to go and investigate architecture, focusing a lot on Carlo Scarpa's work, been very influential through uni. So that to me was a huge thing, to actually go and see these buildings in the flesh and to just be re-inspired again beyond the pages of a book. I think is a really important thing to actually physically experience these places, and that's really a huge thing. But also employment-wise, it's allowed me to make a shift, or prompted me to make a shift as well. I've come from a small firm background for the last couple of years, and I've just moved to Hassel now. So the opportunities just broaden in terms of scope of project and type of work. And the prize is what's allowed me to do that.
So you're going to ask Hassel for a pay rise?
Maybe I should.
All right. Well, maybe, let's have a kind of broader discussion, I suppose, about the Student Biennale Prize in general. And we'll bring both of you in now. So, where do we think the kind of importance is still with this competition? I mean, is it a barometer of style and aesthetics? Is it a way in which the profession can get into academia and understand, what's being taught at schools and so forth?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It's, as Ruth mentioned before, I think it still is a springboard into the profession. It allows you to put yourself forward and say, hey, I've done this, and this is it's still recognised by the profession as a really valuable prize. But I think it is a barometer of sort of what students are thinking about and what I guess what ideas they're throwing out there. It's becoming perhaps, I'm not sure, becoming less about built architecture, but more about ideas as well. I think it's an ideas prize. Partially as well.
I know, Ruth, you were kind of influenced by Bernard Schumi for your project that you put into the Biennale, and it seems to me it's almost these projects, being the avant-garde of what's actually happening at schools, which then get, the ideas get disseminated into a wider audience.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, I just think it's going to be so interesting now that it's online and it will be there, preserved for, forever. And we'll be able to trace those trends and those patterns of what captures the student's imagination. And I think that'll be really, really interesting to see, over the 30 years and beyond how that all works. And then another thing I'd be really interested in is just linking or comparing the student work to the architects that go on and build amazing things, and just see where, can you recognise the germ of the genius to go forward.
Well, maybe we should put that idea to to Blue Scope Steel, and to see. I mean, that's a really fascinating, thing to kind of watch out for, and it's almost like an architectural history project where we can see, the changes in the way of thinking that actually occurs in Australia. Yeah.
And the other thing is the schools that are represented. I mean, the first few years were very heavily RMIT biased, and it's an anonymous competition, so there's no, the projects are judged on on just what they are. Nobody knows where they came from or who was the author. So I think it's really interesting to see the patterns in which institutions are getting the success. Also the backgrounds of the students, very kind of, you know, from different cultures, different ages.
Yeah.
Look at the gender mix.
That's right. Yeah, it's very interesting to find, you know, that many of the winners, although it's anonymous, have been male as opposed to women. So,
that'll be another webinar.
There'll be another webinar. Well, you know, is it because it's judged through the images and the models, or is there something about, you know, a gendered way of kind of thinking or designing that is valorized in, you know, in certain contexts?
Yeah, very interesting to dwell on.
Yeah.
But now that we've got it online, we'll be able to spend our own hours analysing that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one thing too, you know, comparing sort of different periods and someone's Student Biennale entry with their work now, looking at the differences between 1990 and 2012, where do we see the main differences?
Well, I think the recent work is very sophisticated, very dense, I think, in idea and imagery. I don't know.
It's an interesting question. And I wonder if it touches on something that Ruth mentioned before too, about the access to information, access to resources that you are being inspired by. And obviously today there's this flood of images and information, and I think the online gallery that's happening now is actually a really good thing in that sense, because it makes it accessible for years. And so I wonder whether a lot of the denseness that you talk about comes through the myriad of influence that students are getting these days, and the ease of accessibility of all that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And what about the kind of modes of presentation and also, I suppose, project types we've talked about, but, you know, this proverbial relationship between hand-drawn and digital plays out on the kind of national stage with this competition.
Yeah, and there still seems to be, strangely in this digital age, perhaps not strangely, but there's a very strong hand-drawn focus in a lot of the entries. And I know my years at uni, there was a strong focus on hand drawing and mixing it with the digital. So there's this kind of balance, and there still is it's a tactile element and an understandable element in what you're doing. So you're perhaps not caught up in the screens and the wireframes, but also physically making and doing as well. I think there's still a really good balance, and I'm not your era. There was obviously a strong hand-drawn influence.
We had no
because there was no choice.
Computers, what's that?
It's just so you forget.
Yes, that's right, absolutely.
Forget what we did, you know, lettering through Letraset and colouring with Pantone films. And
I remember doing die-line prints for my entry, and, you know, cutting out bits of tracing paper and kind of sticking down and making different tones as you put it through the ammonia. Yeah, so that's a very, very different sort of approach. I suppose then, you know, it brings us then to the future of a competition such as the Student Biennale, and, you know, with the advent of computation and you know, parametric design, and coming in more and more too is a required understanding of BIM, or building information modeling. I'm wondering how, you know, a competition which relies so heavily on sort of an output-oriented, project-oriented, or even presentation-oriented mode is going to develop to take in, you know, something like, you know, the poetics of BIM. You know, how how buildings become much more information-rich, and how does that then get valued in a competition like this?
Interesting. I think we as a profession and the student body too will just ripen together, and I think the jurors will be more attuned to wanting to see that, and so once again, it will be interesting to see the progression. I think, you know, particularly on an environmental side, to see, and I think it's already happened, that projects that have really considered the environment very carefully are being noticed. And that's definitely changed from the 90s.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely. Usually it's kind of,
well, you know, I'd say that, like I studied through the 80s, let's say the 80s, the 90s it was starting, but it was, I think it would be interesting to see how that develops.
And I think there's also, from what I can see, a disposition towards the old and the new, which means heritage does come into play as well to a certain extent. And there's a particular, again, you know, aesthetic of the very contemporary insertion into heritage kind of precincts and buildings that, you know, that makes a kind of rich project that comes through in the judging. So that's fascinating. Well, I suppose if we kind of look in the future, we certainly hope that the competition and the prize continues, and we know that this particular Student Biennale competition and prize will not exist without the sponsorship and our sort of corporate partner from the Institute's point of view, which is BlueScope Steel. So we're just hoping that, you know, with this online gallery launch, that the material dating right back, I think it goes back to 1986 or something, that is now accessible to the public. And even, you know, I would urge almost architectural historians, you know, doing research on what actually happened in the 80s to go into the website here, and to take a look at the vagaries and the changes in terms of kind of thinking. And so for those who are interested, again, the website for the Student Biennale is www.studentbiennale.com.au. Student Biennale is kind of one word, and it's a really kind of beautifully designed site that actually has a good documentation, including, you know, the award-winning projects, which are, you know, I take two deep breaths when I gotta take a look at what actually happened in the 90s. All right. So on that note, I'd like to thank both of you for your time, you know, to do this sort of interview. Ruth Wilson, Aidan Keenan, thank you for that. And also, I'd like to thank the studio audience and the audience that are following us online with this sort of web seminar. Continue to support the competition, and I urge, you know, students and staff alike within all the architecture programs around Australia to consider entering the competition, because this is the only way it will survive, and I think and keep it going for the next 25 to 27 years. Well, so thank you everyone, and thank you BlueScope Steel.